There, and I'm going to talk a bit about that too, that there's a publication coming out that will talk specifically about, what's happening today. And, from a feminist critical point of view, right? But he had been defending somebody he was, playing a supervisory role to, who had been accused of rape, and he essentially said there's a laboratory of feminists plotting against the men, right? At the same time, he was posting on behalf of the ministry, something about Women's Day, and that we need to promote gender equality, right? This is the same guy posting on Facebook 1 minute talking about a conspiracy, right? And then the next minute posting, as a state dignitary, which is what we see in Haiti, that they're paying lip service to, the kind of international discourse that makes you, civilized, right? So the pink washing of what's actually happening on the ground, right? Which is that everyone is being by kidnappers, right? There's largely insecurity. So again, like we know that the state is capable of doing that, right? Saying one thing to one way at the international level, while on the ground, behaving very different.
Right. And you said they had a name for y'all too. I can't remember what we talked a month,
I'm sorry, everyone. The webinar is live, so you can keep talking. You can keep talking, but
I'll have to find the quote specifically.
Yes,
it was a laboratory of feminists.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I was like, it's true. We do sit around and we're talking and we're plotting, but not to lie, but to expose the truth, right?
Right. The plotters. That's what.
Yeah, the plotters. Yeah. It's just like, okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Look at all these folks coming in. Hi, everyone.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, everybody.
Hey,
I always find it surprising whenever we use the word feminism, or when people identify as a feminist, why cis het men in particular find it so threatening. It's right. Always funny to me. I can never understand why it's so threatening. When we come on and we say, we're feminists, or we have feminist ideologies. I don't get it, because to me, for some reason, men think it's women trying to usurp their authority as men. Mm-hmm. Which I can't get why you would think that is. All we're saying.
Hello. Oh no, Renae.
This tech thing, yeah.
I know. Hi, everyone. Please bear with us while we have some tech issues.
Somebody in the comments said men are canceled.
Oh, for men are canceled. Oh my goodness. Oh, I love this. Listen, we're starting off with these good laughs already. Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Just a lot.
Thank you for joining us.
Hey, everyone. It is a lot, though. They get so...
Yes.
Yay!
I'm sorry, I'm back. I don't know what happened.
Yeah. We're not gonna let this white supremacist technology,
Telling you.
Yes. I'm gonna wait a couple of minutes to let more folks come in. Oh wow, Patrice was from Barbados. Jacinda from Paris.
Agent in the house.
Oh, wow. Guyana is here. Hey. Colombia, Barbados. Wow. Hi, everyone.
Love from Guyana.
Woo!
I love it.
And you're reading, Jamie, from YouTube, the list of folks, not the
Actually, in the Zoom chat. Yep, in the Zoom chat. So we have a lot of people here. So I'm so excited. Panama. Wow.
Jamaica.
This is so great. Well, everyone keep sharing your name, your pronouns, where you're from. We always are so delighted about that. But I'm going to get this event started. So my name is Jamie Swift. I am the executive director of Black Men Radicals. It's really nice for everyone to be here for our third installment of our Caribbean Feminism Series, which is hosted by Black Men Radicals, but is co-curated by the brilliant Nana Brontuo and Dr. Andrea Baldwin. So Like I said, I'm always so joyous and happy for the Caribbean Feminism Series because people show up and show out for the Caribbean Feminism Series every single time, and it's always a delight. And so once again, thank you for being here. This third installment is about honoring Andaiye and talking about Caribbean feminism, feminist advocacy and organizing from multiple intersecting and overlapping intersections, right? We're going to have various perspectives on Caribbean feminist organizing, challenges, positive wins, and the future of Caribbean feminist organizing and all sorts of discussions, right? And so I just want to say, first and foremost, like I always say, I'm excited for us to be here, but please note that this is a safe space, right? Black men radicals, there's no accepting of transphobia, homophobia, queerphobia, ableism, misogynoir, white supremacy, anti-Blackness, you name it, I don't accept it. And if you enact any of these things, I will kick you out permanently. And so respect our guests, respect the hosts, and make sure this is a great and fun conversation. And so my job is done, Nana and Andrea. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here. Thank you for your work, your radicalism, and all that you do, everything that you do to help our communities grow and become better. So thank you so much. And now I pass it off to Nana and Andrea.
Thank you, Jamie. I see there's someone in the chat, Phoebe, who worked with Andaiye in the Global Women's Strike. This is amazing. I want to hear something. I want to hear about your experience. This is great. So I want to ground this event tonight by starting with this book that came out in 2020. It's a collection, can you see? It's a collection of essays that was edited by the formidable Alyssa Trotz. It's Andaiye's writing. And we know that she was instrumental as an activist in the Caribbean and globally. She was instrumental working with the Working People's Alliance, with CAFRA. She was a founding member of Red Thread, involved in so much more organizing, including what I just found out was a founding member of the Guyana Cancer Society. And so I want to start by reading a quote from this. In the editor's note, Dr. Trotz talks about what she calls the politics of precision. And she says that this title was chosen by Andaiye when and the point is to change I'm quoting now, the point is to change the world is striking in its clarity and simplicity. Most importantly, perhaps it springs from Andaiye's unwavering belief in self-organized and abundant energies, activities, and capacities of working people, starting with those most vulnerable and excluded, the unwaged carers of our society. And she quotes her by saying, "The task is unfinished. It is as true today as it was when Walter Rodney made the point that working to build unity in struggle in the face of all that militates against it is a precondition of the continued work of enlarging in our freedom." And in her 2009 address at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill, in the Patrick Emmanuel Memorial Lecture, she says this: "While we need organizing that is anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, our organizing must also be anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic, and against all forms of exploitation, subordination, and discrimination. Similarly, while we need organizing against the forms of exploitation, subordination, and discrimination that the left has traditionally ignored or downplayed, or our organizing must also be anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist." And so it is with that opening and grounding of this event that we want to celebrate the legacy. And to do so, we have several amazing Black women from throughout the Caribbean, both the English-speaking, the French-speaking, and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean. And so I will hand it over to Nana to introduce these amazing activist scholars.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you to everybody that has joined. Thank you so much. I see Alyssa Trox is here. I see Margaret Prescott is here, who is a close friend of Andaiye's as well, and a veteran organizer and activist in the community here and throughout the region. So thank you so much for everyone who's joining. And I'm gonna read off the bios for our panelists, and I'll start with Renae Green. Renae is an LGBTQ youth and women rights advocate who is committed to and passionate about her work with the community. Renae has served as the LGBT representative on the Jamaica Country Coordinating Mechanism for the Global Fund for 2 years and currently serves as the NGO alternate. She is also the Jamaica representative for UC Trans, which is the only regional trans network. She served also as the Restless Development Youth Advocate, as well as the IPPF Youth Advocate, both in her capacity as a sexual and reproductive health rights advocate. Additionally, she brings with her regional and international exposure through participation in human rights workshops, conferences, and training. She also sits on the Civil Society Steering Committee for the Spotlight Initiative to End Gender-Based Violence as a Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights Representative. Currently, Renae serves as the Executive Director for Transwave Jamaica, which is the only trans-led and focused organization operating in Jamaica. Under her portfolio, she is responsible for leading the organization and stands at the front of trans advocacy in Jamaica. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we have Dr. Amarilys Estrella, who is an ACLS Emerging Voices postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins University. She's also a founding member of We Are All Dominicans, a collective of graduate students, educators, scholars, artists, activists, and community members of Dominican and Haitian descent who joined forces in October 2013. Sorry, y'all, it's been a week, I'm tired. So sorry. So she's also a founding member of We Are All Dominican, a collective of graduate students, educators, scholars, artists, activists, and community members of Dominican and Haitian descent who joined forces in October 2013 to denounce the Dominican Constitutional Tribunal's decision, TC 0168/13, which stripped the nationality of more than 4 generations of Dominicans of Haitian descent. She's also a member of Mujeres Negras, RD. She holds a BA in political science from Hunter College, CUNY, a master's degree in Latin American Caribbean studies, and a PhD in sociocultural anthropology from New York University. Thank you so much for joining us today. And finally, we have Mamyrah Dougé-Prosper, who's a visiting assistant professor of Africana Studies at Davidson College. Her research focuses on social movements in the Caribbean and in particular in Haiti. She's also the international coordinator of the Pan-African Solidarity Network with community movement builders. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And so now we will start off with the questions, and Andrea, you can lead us in.
Yes, so again, thank you all for being here. And we want to start off with the little questions. We'll get into the heavy questions a little later. But I'm interested in finding out more about who or what ignited and sustains your commitment to feminist organizing in the Caribbean. And we can go with, let's start with Mamyrah.
Let's jump right into it. Thank you so much for having me. And I think later this will come up in the questions, but I'm hoping that with this series that we can continue to think through how we could do it in translation, right? So that I can imagine several other folks who should be sitting here, right? Talking about what's happening in Haiti, and because of the language issue, right? That kind of communication doesn't get to happen, directly. So I just wanted to say that. And so in terms of what catalyzed me, since the beginning, right? I would say it's living the contradictions of a, Marxist father who didn't necessarily have, necessarily all of his politics figured out as far as, right, his relationship specifically to my mother, but still encouraging me, right, to not allow patriarchal domination, right, to control my life too much, right? But more specifically in terms of, as an academic, the things that you read that really capture you, right? That if I'm thinking about my sort of colonial education in Haiti, one of the first times I heard about feminism was through Simone de Beauvoir, right? And that speaks to, you know, a colonial education, but just how people understood feminism as a Western phenomenon, right? So I think that it takes coming to college and being in, you know, certain classes in Africana studies, actually, where we're reading Audre Lorde or, you know, the Combahee River Collective, which I feel like every Black feminist is going to name, right, as a text that really forces them to think about the intersections of oppression and also the intersections of our powers. So I would say that's what drives me sort of theoretically, right? But as far as on the ground work and both sort of, you know, an activist positioning, but also doing research, right? Some of the collectives of women that I've met in Haiti, and I will particularly lift up the organization Haitian Women in Solidarity, which is SOFA, is the acronym. You know, do a lot of good work thinking through, right, how to have a feminist agenda that is cross-class, right, and doesn't sort of stay on the theory level and, you know, on the academic level or, you know, the professional feminist level, right? So thinking about what that means for collaboration across class with women who occupy different types of positioning, and even the call that SOFA is, you know, younger director, and that speaks to sort of what's happening in the region as far as the kind of new feminist organizations who are doing more intersectional work, right? So if I called for a greater alliance and proximity between, right, so-called cisgendered feminists, right, and the LGBT community, which, and, you know, Communauté M is a much more, you know, indigenous Haitian way of thinking, you know, talking about LGBT, but I'm going to use that language because, you know, it's common to all of us, right? But there are ways we know that in different places, folks have different ways that their particular cultures speak about these different gendered and sexual identities. But anyway, right, so that, I think that's a powerful move to have made last year, and this was during the commemoration of the 10th year, this was 2020, sorry, right before this COVID thing, right? I'm like, what year was it? And, you know, to make this call while they were celebrating, right, 3 of the pillars of feminist movement in Haiti who had died during the earthquake, right? And sort of announcing a new wave of the kind of Haitian feminism that should, you know, start in this 2020 decade on, right? So I think like those are the folks on the ground, specifically in the Caribbean, who continue to sustain me in my commitment. So I'll stop there.
Renae, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think for me, it's because I'm trans, you know, and just because of the injustices that I faced, you know. One thing I'm grateful for is that I finally understood, like, the concept, let me start there. The concept that I found most enlightening for me was when I learned about intersectionality, right? And what that actually means. And so you would think growing up in a predominantly Black country that certain things wouldn't be an issue or wouldn't affect your ability to live, you know, a decent life. But then if you're someone like me who you realize that you're different, you're trans, and then on top of it, you're Black. Then on top of that, you're a woman. And then on top of that, you're also not a stereotypical woman, as in that you're fat, you're not cis-presenting or you know, passing, as the term we use. And then you realize that all of these issues affect your ability to get a job, your ability to be able to, you know, buy food or to find a place to live or even to go to school. And so when I realized that all these things affect me, I'm like, these things affect me and my community, but I don't see anybody else taking up the fight, or if there is there's only one person doing it. Mm-hmm. And so in my head and in everything that was going on, I was like, well, if I don't do it, then nobody else is going to. And if I don't at least try, then things won't be better for me. And maybe it won't be better for me. Maybe I'll never see it in my generation. But at least me doing this and taking this step will ensure that the generations to come will have something better. Like a trans child or a trans young person or a trans person in general won't have to go through the same things, you know, I had to and are still going through, just to survive in a country that I was born and raised. And so that for me was, you know, the reason why I decided to not only do the work that I'm doing, but to continue and to push through despite all of the challenges. Because, you know, people see us and people see us like in the spotlight and they think, oh, everything is great. But then all these issues still affect us and all these things still compound. And like and so patriarchy still affects us the same way it affects, you know, any other marginalized group. And when you add the different layers on top of it, you know, it's a lot. And so if we don't stand up and if we don't push and if we don't fight, then these things won't change. And then we just have a continuing cycle of oppression and of hate and of death. Because, you know, a lot of trans women of color die every year, more so than, you know, a lot of other groups. And if we want things to change, then we do have to make a stand. And that's the reason why I continue to do what I do.
Yeah, Amarilys.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for the invitation. It truly is an honor. I have to say that there are so many people that have motivated me. I would probably start with the women in my family, both my elders and my ancestors, who are not here anymore, but who still guide me. And I think I start with them because they are the ones that have provided the first examples of strength and determination through their small acts of love, and the everyday practices of resistance. And thinking more generally, I think I would probably echo some of what Mamyrah has said about, it's not till I get to college that I get that sort of moment to really think about Black feminism, to engage with it. And I think even if I'm honest with myself, it's been as a professor having the opportunity to create my own courses that I get to choose and decide how I teach about Black feminism and how much time I can dedicate to looking at the work of Black feminists across the Caribbean, Latin America, the United States, right? So I just want to acknowledge that there wasn't as much space for me as a young person to really explore Black feminism theoretically. And so if I think about it more generally, I'm so thankful for the spaces that have been created by collectives such as Cite Black Women and Black Latinas Know, who are guiding my scholarship now. And then I guess if I was to speak more specifically of someone who inspires me and that guides me in terms of my activism, I would have to say it's Sonia Pierre, whose image you can see behind me. And she was a Black Dominican woman of Haitian descent, human rights activist, whose efforts to combat anti-Haitian sentiment, anti-Blackness, and misogynoir began at the age of 14. And so at the age of 14, she's organizing her community to protest the conditions of sugarcane workers. And I was very fortunate to have met Sonia Pierre many years ago. And before she passed, I have to say, I don't think I fully understood what her life and legacy would mean for me, but also for her own community and for the Dominican and Haitian diaspora until afterwards. But I really do think that her words and her work ask us to really persist and continue to fight for social justice. And it's really part of that legacy that she leaves behind. So I would just say that when I think about who guides me, what motivates me, it's really the work of Black Dominican women of Haitian descent, Black Dominican women more generally, who are working every day to combat anti-Black racism, misogynoir, and patriarchy more generally.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for all the reflections that are also coming in the comments. Many folks are sharing when they were first introduced to Andaiye's work and sort of their introduction to activism as well, sort of mirroring the things you all are talking about. I wanted us to now sort of move forward in conversation. I want to learn a little bit more. I want us to learn more about the state of things, political and social terrain in the region, but also in the specific communities you're working in. Like, what opportunities or challenges are we seeing with the work currently?
I guess I can go.
I wasn't sure if we were following the same order.
Right.
No, you can go. Whoever feels convicted to speak first.
I mean, for Jamaica, it's difficult. I mean, in the Caribbean, it's difficult being a trans person in general, or being from the LGBT community. But particularly in Jamaica, because of course we don't have legislation that recognizes us or protects us. On top of that, the community has the highest rates of poverty. We also, face the highest rates of violence as well. And even when it comes to things like affordable housing, our housing in general is also difficult. So there's a lot of homelessness as well within the community. COVID kind of made the situation even worse, because those few members of the community that had jobs lost them because businesses had to downsize, and of course they were the first to go. And it even affected those community members who did sex work, which, just putting it out there, I believe sex work is real work. So just saying. And so that also impacted their ability to earn and provide for themselves, which further put them, in a more disparaging position. In my organization, we tried to, and still trying to assist as best as we can, but of course resources are limited, and with COVID, everybody's affected. So it's not just Jamaica, and everybody has to kind of be tightening. Despite all of this, the community somehow still manages to pull together, and we still manage to, get things done, and we support each other where we can. It's not always easy, and that's I think that's the strength that we have as, being Black queer people. We're here, and things have always been hard, but things are also improving. And so while, we're still having our little political situations and our different things that are happening, we're still seeing improvements. I mean, we won the case with the Inter-American Court of Justice just the other day. That's a huge thing for us. Some of our legislators actually reaching out to us to ensure that their documents at least don't hurt us any more than they've already been hurting us.
Mm-hmm.
And to us, that's a win as well. When we can have national dialogues and our ministers actually show up and actually show an interest and actually are willing to say that they're in support of protecting the lives of trans people, to us, that's a win. And those things have been happening. I can say I'm not that old. I'm 30 this year, but growing up, the Jamaica I grew up in, the Jamaica that was when I was about 15 or 16, is definitely not the same Jamaica that I'm in now that I'm almost 30. And so I'm grateful for the little wins, but there's still so much more that we need to do. And it's not even just for trans people already. Trans people only, rather. There are other issues that are so important that we, for some reason, as a society, still are having a hard time grappling with. The conversation of abortion is coming up again, and even that is still a huge fight in terms of giving women the rights to their bodies and to make their own decisions when it comes to their bodies, and letting men understand that while they can give their opinions shouldn't be the overarching factors in making any decision for any woman. And so those conversations are still happening, and the conversation around sexual harassment is still happening. And there are so many of these issues that are there. And I think the problem is that because for some reason, the different communities, we don't necessarily coordinate well together on some of these issues. Women's rights groups within Jamaica take on abortion, and they don't necessarily believe that, the organizations that deal with like LGBT issues and stuff, or trans issues, should necessarily be involved. But as an advocate living in Jamaica, and as someone who identifies as a feminist, I think it's my responsibility to also speak up on these issues, because they affect my sisters. I mean, I'm not able to reproduce, and I can't carry a child, but it doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to support my sister in her right to be able to make that decision for herself. And so I think these are some of the things that we're dealing with, and we're still dealing with. And that's just the context that we're living in right now in Jamaica.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That was a really great overview. Who would like to jump in next?
I'm happy to jump in. So as I had mentioned earlier before, I think we went live, I imagine most people are following what's happening in Haiti, and perhaps it's very confusing, and I'm not going to get into the details of it, but I think in terms of what concerns us here specifically, and what folks on the ground are starting to come to articulate, right, which is not only for us to amplify what's going on, right, but to come to figure out what kind of direct actions we can take together to move things in Haiti while we respect, right, sovereignty and all those other concerns that are valid, right, in terms of how we do solidarity work. But right, in terms of what's going on, just last year, 2020, I think the record number is 944 kidnappings, right? With a majority of those kidnappings being, or those kidnapped being women, and almost every case of kidnapping of women, right, being accompanied by rape, right? That rape is a part of that kidnapping experience that this person is having, right? So the feminist groups, and more than just the feminists, right, have had to raise their voice about it. It's different groups, sort of don't put the emphasis on who's getting actually kidnapped, but when you look at the numbers, right, it's overwhelmingly women. But we see, right, rape being used as a tool, right, to silence people. So if we're thinking back at, for example, the massacre in 2018 in La Saline neighborhood in Port-au-Prince of 71 people, 11 women were collectively raped, right, including children. In that mess, people were dismembered, and there was no real investigation. And actually, you had human rights organizations as well as even the UN occupying forces, right, putting out certain independent reports showing that it's very clear, right, that the certain key people in the state, right, had been fundamental in organizing such a massacre. So we see the use of, right, violence, massacre, and rape in this process where folks are talking about, right, these gangs have not materialized out of nowhere, right? Most folks know the statistics in Haiti, right? Most people are unemployed, and those who are making money are not making more than $2 to $3, right? So where do these gangs get the guns, right? Especially if you have a president who's responsible, as he has claimed to be, after God, there is none but him, right? That he's responsible for the security of the people, right, in his territory. So what happens when you have 117 gangs controlling the territory? And one of the ways that they do it, right, is the control of women's bodies through the threat of rape and through actually raping them. It also means, right, it silences even their menfolk, if you will, right? Because everyone understands, right, the impact that rape has, on more than just the person who's experienced this assault. So I think that this is what we're seeing, right? And this is what a lot of the feminists have been issuing a lot of statements about it and really bringing attention to that. And most recently, right, thinking about also how this, what folks are starting to comfortably call a dictatorship. And if you're still, deciding if you think it's a dictatorship, one person running an entire show without any checks and balances, I don't know what else you call that, right? There's no parliament. The justice system is really controlled by this one person. So, right, so it's really a dictatorship, right? Until we all come to agree on that, what we can see is while this state terror, right, via the gangs and is continuing, the president is issuing decrees, right, to create more free trade zones. And what's happening is most recently, SOFA has been putting out information about how some of their members who collectively own land together, right, and who are basically doing, right, what we're calling, solidarity economies, right, mutual aid cooperative, land ownership and producing on that land, right, for local consumption, right, to fight back a heavily, import-based economy that their land was taking from them in order to, right, bring forth the possibility of, right, a Coca-Cola producing plant, right? So we see the ways that, the the fact that folks are even scared to organize, scared to meet, right? The streets are controlled by the gangs for the most part, and they've encircled the city in a way, the capital in ways that, right, if you want to go from south to north, right, you have to pass through these territories. So it breaks people's ability to do, right, to go to the field and meet and talk and exchange, right? So that we see that that's a consequence on movement building, right, across all sectors, right, not just the feminists. And specifically now, right, how, again, this, the displacement of people, right, and taking over their land is specifically also affecting, right, what the category that Haitians call like peasant women, right, women who work the land, right, and who live on the land. And so I think that what that threatens too is sort of the alternative that Haiti has always offered us, offered the world, right, is the sort of LACU system that exists in many parts of the Haiti still, which, oh yes, I saw Margaret. Yeah, I had seen on Real News Network, Margaret, yes. Sorry, I saw the comments, it was hard not to read it. And so we see that, again, right, there's, folks are needing us to, right, the rest of us, and this is part of why I was excited to be part of this conversation, right, to listen and to amplify and to figure out direct actions. And I'm really excited about what we might learn from you in Jamaica, right, about bringing some of these cases to a much more international level, right, because we really, if the state, and I think this is like feminist organizing 101, that if we look at the history of feminism in Caribbean specifically, right, it's always had to be transnational, right? We always have to go to the supranational, spaces to say, hey, right, the people that we're supposed to be coexisting with, right, are killing us and are raping us, right? And so it seems like we're gonna have to be in another phase of that, at least in terms of what's happening in Haiti. And I'm hoping that this can be a space, right, to bring in some of these other folks who are in Haiti doing the work, because I'm, located in the States, right? And that's why we're saying we may need some translation, right? So I think actually, like, unfortunately, that there's been COVID, but what it's done is force us to do more of these talks with each other, and learn from one another. And I think, like, at least in respects to Haiti, folks are really, inviting folks in to talk and strategize together at the transnational level. So I'm excited about what can come out of this too, like concretely, this conversation. So I would say that's the context. It's pretty bleak. But part of what I came here to do is say this again, right? In hopes that this could be a space where we could come to do something together about it.
Thank you so much for that, Amarilys.
So I feel like I'm also going to be bleak, but maybe I'll start by saying that the example of the Transnational and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is one that also resonates in the Dominican Republic in terms of what I'll be speaking about, because what I'm going to focus on is just the last 2 decades of policies and rulings that have retroactively denationalized Dominicans of Haitian descent. And yet we have examples in terms of the work of Sonia Pierre and the MUDA, the Dominico-Haitian women's movement that she led, which was like one of the first cases at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights where they actually got a ruling in their favor, where the 2 young girls, Jan and Bosico, where the ruling was that they should be recognized as Dominican citizens and that there should be some forms of reparation for the harm caused. Now, whether the Dominican government has done anything about that is a whole other conversation. But I think, just kind of hearing, just from hearing Renae and Mamyrah, it's making me think about, well, just the importance of these transnational spaces, both the more formal Inter-American court system, but also what I hope we'll get into later on in terms of the conversation. But in terms of context, I guess a moment that a lot of people might remember or know of is 2013, which is when the ruling, the Constitutional Tribunal ruling 168-13 in the Dominican Republic retroactively denationalized more than 4 generations of Black Dominicans of Haitian descent. And this ruling was really just a culmination of a decades-long process of other laws and policies that have been put in place to slowly strip away the rights of the children of Haitian migrants. So even though 2013 is kind of like the moment that the world recognizes that there's this terrible ruling and that this is happening and affecting more than 200,000 people potentially, when we look at historically, we know that this is just one moment of many. And so I wanted to just first acknowledge that, because Sonia Pierre had passed in 2013 already, but her work had been ongoing for so long. And so just for context, this is really where a lot of the work that the collective that I'm working with starts. And what we've seen since 2013 is that organizers on the ground have really come together to denounce these policies, to denounce this ruling, and that there was, because of international pressure, there was some response to the ruling itself, which was the creation of a law, 169-14, which was technically supposed to create a process by which individuals would either have their nationality restored, or if you were, it basically split people up into 2 groups, a group A and a group B. Group A being the folks who had already some kind of national documentation that acknowledged their Dominican nationality. And Group B were the folks who were born in the country, so therefore were entitled to birthright citizenship, but were not registered. And so this law in 2014 basically creates these 2 processes where all of a sudden you have folks who technically will be automatically have their citizenship restored because they're Group A, and then there's this Group B who is now sort of put into this other kind of legal limbo because supposedly there will be a naturalization process. And so now they're being treated as migrants, pretty much, if you think about it. And also the kind of citizenship that they'll potentially gain will not be the same as someone who's born in the country. Think about, for example, who can run to be president, just to give you an example of what then happens. In reality, if you ask anyone who's impacted by this law and these rulings, neither of these responses have been effective. So in reality, everyone is still very much in a legal limbo. And while some, a very small number, have been able to get some kind of documentation back, there are many others who are either being sued now because now they have 2 registries created by the Dominican government itself, or the folks who were told that if they went through the naturalization process, they would eventually have Dominican citizenship, are still waiting. So we're talking about 2014, it's now 2021, right? So just to give you the context. And so all of this has created greater confusion and division instead of really providing a response. And if we think about this then in particular, how it affects Black women, one of the things that the Black women activists have pointed out is that the entire ruling and all of these policies have a particular, what they call a rostro de mujer, or the face of a woman, because it's Black women's bodies that are being policed and imagined as producing Black non-citizens, right? And so at the time of the births of these children, and there's a whole bunch of other policies, so it gets really confusing, but up until 2010, birthright citizenship existed in the country. So after 2010, there's a whole other series of procedures. But the point being that either way, darker skinned Black women in hospitals are being profiled and oftentimes not being given the correct birth certificate of recognition of the child's birth that then allows them to go register their child's birth. They're often given a pink one, which marks the child as a foreigner. And so these practices continue to happen on a daily basis. And what we see is that there's a continued sort of fear-mongering, which we see in the US also in terms of migrant women taking up space in the hospitals. And again, who gets profiled in that process is darker-skinned Black women, whether they're of Haitian descent or not. So just recognizing that as well. And then I just wanted to say that I wanted to just talk a little bit about the Dominican Republic itself as one of the places with the highest rates of femicide in the region, and also one of the few countries in the region that has a full ban on abortion. And so again, if we think about what this means in terms of the kind of heightened vulnerability that it creates for Haitian migrant women, for darker skinned Black Dominican women, either who are of Haitian descent or not. And just to point out that there's just been a full ban on abortion since 1884. And what a lot of the activists have been fighting for is a decriminalization in 3 instances of abortion. So they're not asking for the full decriminalization of abortion, but just these particular instances of it. And so that's been an ongoing fight that in more recent years, I've seen that there's been a greater effort to include some of the more vulnerable voices who often aren't very much part of these mainstream feminist spaces. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is that there's also the pandemic, which we've all talked about. And you can imagine what kind of vulnerability then emerges for individuals who are not being recognized by their government, their inability to gain access to government support during a pandemic, which then requires a lot of work and efforts by feminist movements, by Black anti-racist movements who are coming together to really create a space to support through mutual aid communities who are particularly vulnerable during this time. So these are the difficult parts, and I'll try to be a little more hopeful during the next round.
No, thank you all for that. Like, this was a great overview, and in particular, learning more about just safety, security, healthcare, education, citizenship, and naturalization. In particular, what you shared around like Black women, dark-skinned Black women in the DR is really resonating with me because it's so dangerous. And so I guess now, like, thinking about this and thinking in particular as we're on digital space and we're thinking of different ways to collaborate, I want to ask this next question. But starting with a quote from Andaiye from 2009. While we need organizing that is anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, our organizing must also be anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic, and against all forms of exploitation, subordination, and discrimination. So right there, I personally love that sentence. Just put it right there. We need to hold all of this and do all of these things within our work as organizers, advocates, so on and so forth. So in your work, in your perspectives, how is regional organizing and advocacy really framing and addressing these different intersections of inequalities and oppressions? How are we addressing it? What would you like to see if you're not seeing a progress?
I'll go again. For me, I would definitely like to see greater synergies. Zach, I have a problem, and it's something that I've shared with, some of the local feminist spaces. For some reason, as a trans woman, I don't necessarily think the trans community is so welcomed into feminist spaces. For many reasons, and I'm not even saying that I don't understand, because one thing I acknowledge as a trans person is that I was born into certain aspects of male privilege, and I acknowledge that, and even though it's not the same thing, and I've always been a part of a marginalized group, up until I actually affirmed my trans identity, there were a lot of benefits that I had. And so, as a trans person, I acknowledge that. And the cis women in particular face a lot of things from birth, from the very birth, patriarchy and, the whole hegemonic setup affects them. And so I get that. But then I also feel like, because the one thing that we can agree on is that we're all marginalized and oppressed, and patriarchy affects us all, right? And it is through that shared oppression that we should be able to come together and to work towards making the changes that we want to see. And so like I'm really hoping, and I've been making a concerted effort as well, as particularly from my organizational standpoint, to ensure that we support women-led and women-focused organizations. Not just as for lip service and saying that we're partners, but because some of us are women as well, and because our issues intersect, and trans issues are women's issues, and women's issues are trans issues, and feminist issues are trans issues as well. And so what I want to see from a regional perspective is there greater synergies with the groups. And when we talk about feminism, when we talk about feminist spaces, to also be inclusive of those people who are trans and diverse, who are from trans and diverse genders, to be a part of the conversation, because it also strengthens the movement and the collective. Having more voices speaking on the issue has greater impact. At least that's what I've seen, and that's what I've seen, work. And so that's what I want to see. I want to be able to support more trans feminist spaces, to see more trans feminist spaces, yes, but to also support more feminist spaces as well, and to be a part of those movements, and to give of what I can give of. I'm not saying I'm the smartest. I'm no academic. I'll say that. I'll say that. Like, university kicked my ass. It's still kicking my ass. But but I do know that I'm able to add my voice and to add my little expertise into where it needs to go. And so that can help to strengthen, what's happening in your country or in another country. And of course, if it's even to just be there as your support, because this is a lot. And this is, just listening to what's happening in Haiti and in the DR, it is a lot. And what's happening in Jamaica, it is a lot. And so if we can even just be there for our other sisters who are doing the work and who are putting up with so much and putting up themselves and putting their lives at risk, I think that's enough, right? But the space also needs to be open and be willing to accept, the extra voices from those other groups that want to support the movement and who also have that shared lived experience as well.
I feel like we developed a new order. I'm just gonna go. But I just want to echo Renae about that, right? That there's work to be done locally. And as I mentioned earlier, January 2020, at least so far, Haitian Women in Solidarity made the call for a more formal coming together of, right, what we call, quote unquote, the feminist movement versus the LGBT movement, right? And to Renae's point, there are many more overlaps than not. Now, of course, the particular political situation, I think, has made those efforts not yet come to fruition. And actually, there was an event that a couple of other folks and I organized early mid-December in Haiti, where we invited particularly Courage, who's one of the leading LGBT organizations in Haiti, to speak. And one of the things that the new director explained, right, is that it's hard for Courage or other LGBT organizations to find like local partners, right? And it's much easier for them to be connected to an international movement rather than connecting with movements on the actual ground, right, where they are. And so that, I think there are burgeoning discussions about, especially with this new generation of feminists who are much more sort of open and ready for coming together and thinking through the issues together than perhaps the older generation was, because, of a variety of reasons that I think we all know. But I think, there's hope even in the picture that I portrayed earlier, right? For some, and I think this is exactly what a dictatorship does, right? Prevents these kind of synergies from happening, right? That part of what you do when you're terrorizing everyone into silence is prevent that work from happening, right? That we're meeting and we're talking and we're saying, yeah, you too, me too, yeah, me too, right? And like really doing that kind of, analysis together, right? And it's not that there isn't a will there or there weren't burgeoning moments, right? But what's been happening in the last couple of years, right, is preventing that. And actually you see many times how the state wants to instrumentalize these differences by pinning the groups against each other, right? Or even how funders come from the global north, right? And they cut up the issues, right, into these different categories that make the organizations not find the room to speak together, or, you know, they're pinned up against each other, competing for the same pots of money, rather than really speaking to each other and figuring out, you know, their own, you know, bottom up, if you will, grassroots approach to the problem. So I think, you know, I like the idea of thinking that we can come together in conversations without our, you know, global north mediators too, right? Like, what would that look like if, you know, Caribbean folks could just talk to each other without the US Embassy being involved, for example, right? I think that that's one of the things that we see in terms of organizations needing capital funding, sometimes turning to, you know, one partner who's willing to work with you on the ground, who may also have, right, other pinkwashing, right, imperialist intentions, right, and want to further break the possibility of people working across so-called categories, right, towards a more, you know, national agenda. So yeah, I'm hoping that conversations like this, right, will provide that space, you know, while people, I've been saying, you know, a lot of the folks are talking about in Haiti how, right, social media, and I know we all have the appropriate, you know, very relevant critiques of it. I mean, Zoom, everyone says, you know, we're being spied on, but at the same time, right, we do know, and we're just giving them all of our information. I mean, this is on YouTube anyways, anybody can see it. But right, what does it mean for us to think about these tools to communicate, like, across borders, and then figuring out the translation piece, which I know, like, most of us are like, oh my God, so much to sit through translations, but, you know, we're all in the business of doing translation work anyway, even when we're speaking the same language, right? That's what organizers do. So, you know, adding that extra type of translation in the form of language, you know, actual language, I think, you know, maybe we should find a little more room for patience for that. I'll just stop there.
So I'll echo what Renae and Mamyrah have said. In terms of the language, I think you're right. There are challenges, but there's so many ways that we can also try to make it work. In our own work this summer, we found ourselves really kind of caught up in how do you make a, you know, a sort of a space where you can have this. Well, we figured out how to get Spanish and English, but Creole was definitely always the challenge then. And so I'm just, in hearing you, I'm reflecting on how there are ways that we can try to really make these spaces multilingual and really allow for more voices, right? In terms of this sort of the idea around amplifying that we're talking about, right? So just wanted to echo that. And also what Renae has said. And I was thinking that maybe what I can add in terms of this question might be by just speaking a little bit of what We Are All Dominican, the collective that I'm part of, that's based out of New York. So again, also thinking about ourselves as diaspora and what does it mean to speak about the Caribbean from this position, from this place. And how what we've tried to do is really think about amplifying the voices specifically of Black Dominicans of Haitian descent in our case, because this is what we've come together for. And the other thing we always like to say is that we're following in a long tradition of collaboration on the island and in the Dominican and Haitian diaspora, who have been fighting for human rights and against systemic racism aquí y allá, right? So here and there. And so we really just see our work as one example of many around transnational solidarity that has already been taking place for a long time. And we really see this as a sort of a daily practice that we have to build into the kind of transnational solidarity that we're doing to combat anti-Blackness. So in our case, it's really meant that we've had to have these difficult conversations around anti-Blackness, anti-Haitian sentiment with our own families and communities to really start discussing what are some of the the systemic discriminatory policies that exist, and then how have those also permeated society, and what does that look like in terms of our communities. And so we've really tried to create a space that is multi-ethnic, that we're having cross-class conversations, and that we're really fostering transnational solidarity and talking about human rights. But again, I think the biggest piece for us has been to amplify those voices. So for example, the Reconocido movement, who is the movement led by Black Dominicans of Haitian descent that have been denationalized. We work closely with them in organizing ourselves. And so anything that we do, we try to consult with them specifically to make sure that we are leading by their, not leading, but taking their lead on what we're doing. And so just to give an example, this summer, again, because of the pandemic, so much of what we've been doing is online, right? This connectedness that you were speaking to. And what we tried to do was create a space online called the Diaspora Dialogues. And so in that space, we had panelists who were speaking to pressing issues affecting Black diasporic people. And so at some point that was the pandemic. Specifically, it was about how to create mutual aid efforts. And other points, it was specifically talking about denationalization and what does it mean 7 years later. But again, it's been a space to really kind of find ways to bridge the issues that we're facing in our different communities, and to also find the overlap. And the last exciting thing that I'll say we've been trying to work with Reconocidos on their new project Muñecas Negras RD, which it's been the last 2 years. It's Black Doll. It's called Muñecas Negras RD, means Black Dolls, DR. And they're working with young women, girls, in several bates in the Dominican Republic, and they're learning how to create Black dolls for personal and economic empowerment. And so it seems very innocuous, and yet they're working around highlighting the value of Black identity, and to talk about gender discrimination. They're really creating an intimate space for each other. And while others might not understand it, right, because they think of the issues of denationalization, sort of this big question of citizenship, here's this space in which they're talking about how they are very deeply and intimately impacted, not just in terms of not having documentation, but what does it mean for them as Black women to create a space for themselves, to talk about the impact of not being considered a citizen of their only place they recognize and know. So I think in talking about recognizing the work and the transnational solidarity, this is really where a lot of our focus has been. And I think there's a lot left that can be done, of course. And yet, I think for us, it's really been about taking the lead in this process. I mean, following the lead. I keep saying taking the lead, following their lead in this process, not taking the lead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we've been talking about coalition building and working together, I want to go back to kind of this work, because there's a lot that has been put into here that has made Andaiye's work so real, much more real to me. And in this text, she talks about, one of the essays talks about the power relations embedded in every facet of our lives and the need to organize together to overturn them. And in doing that, I think what I recognize a lot here is that Andaiye also understood the importance of working with institutions. So she worked, for instance, with University of the West Indies. She worked with Government of Guyana. She worked on the international stage and the institutions on the global stage. And I'm thinking about this too, and this question is going to be pitched to Renae first, because I had an opportunity to look through Transwave's health strategy. And in that strategy, the strategy addresses social vulnerability, stigma, violence, HIV/AIDS, communicable disease, mental health, self-harm, substance abuse. It is very, very comprehensive. And in that strategy, Transwave basically identifies allies, governmental allies, civil society allies, and academia, and lays out a strategy and goals for decriminalization, in combination with these allies around issues like housing, social security, and much, much more to make sure that trans folks can have better health and longer life. And so my question is, how are politicians, the academy, civil society, how are you able to either form connections, work with them, engage with them with regard to the goals of your particular organizations to enact justice on the ground?
Well,
and that was a long question.
It was. In terms of our partners, IGDS as an institute has been, they've been like one of our biggest supporters. They continue to be one of our biggest supporters. You know, in actuality, that's one of the reasons why I'm able to even do my degree now. You know, they were super, super excited when I said to them I wanted to actually finish my degree and all of that. And they're walking me through the process of doing that. And they've been just so amazing in terms of the trans community in general. The Ministry of Health has always been a huge supporter of the work. And since our beginning, and mind you, Transwave is only 5 years old. So let's take that for a moment. We're only 5. I know it sounds and it seems as if we've been around since forever, but we're only 5 years old. And so a lot of the partnerships that we have were actually established through our network in Jamaica, which we call the Equality for All Network. And the Equality for All Network is a group of organizations which are queer focused. And it's Transwave, JFLAG, We Change, which is Women's Empowerment for Change, which is our women's arm, and also Equality Youth. And these are 4 NGO partners. And so of course, JFLAG was the first. And when we started up, which I think the rest of us started up around the same time, We Change is a year older than us. So that's our big sister organization. And so they were able to connect us. And so we were able to hold on to those partnerships. And since then, in the 5 years, we've kind of made our own connections with entities, both locally and internationally. And so we've been trying our best to maintain those partnerships. I will say that a lot of them that we gained since, you know, my time with Transwave, because I'm huge on partnership. The organization is huge on partnership because we can't do this by ourselves. We need people, and you know, people need people, and we need people, and we need to be able to have other people talk about our issues as well, or to at least support us from the back or support us from the front. But either way, we do need support, and so we focus on creating the partnerships and maintaining them. And so we were able to get on with the Ministry of Health, and through the Ministry of Health, they've been able to connect us to other ministries. And so that's how we've been able to work. And of course, our NGO partners who also serve the community, because we are the only trans organization in the country. And so, you know, it was necessary for them to also maintain those partnerships with us. I will say though that it's still been challenging, but then for the last 5 years or so, the different politicians have actually, and our different key stakeholders have actually been more receptive of what we have to say. And I think it's more so because they're recognizing that more and more people aren't so afraid of being open about who they are. And we're now holding them accountable to ensure that that everybody's treated in the same ways that they're supposed to be treated, because we're people. And so, you know, if our constitution and the different laws and policies that are in place say, you know, that you have a responsibility to the people of Jamaica, we're also citizens of Jamaica, and therefore we should have those same rights. And so we have more and more people, especially even within the diaspora, saying to our government, oh, this is no longer acceptable. This is no longer okay. And you have to now start thinking about not just the cishet people that live in the country, but also those other groups of people who don't fit into what you consider to be normal. And so we've been holding our governments more accountable. And because of that, they've been more receptive to listen and to hear, because they also recognize that we're a vote And they also recognize that they do need us if they want to continue to stay in power. And so on both sides, you know, because even members of the opposition have been reaching out, especially when they want to push like private members' motions, or if they want to push a specific bill, they will reach out to have us go through and review those documents just to make sure, you know, that it's not infringing on anybody's rights and that it represents the different groups. And so it's been years and years of work being put in by other entities that we've benefited from, but also within the 5 years, us really ensuring that we showed up in every space, that we shook the hands of every person that we needed to shake, and that we showed up, and not just showed up, but showed up in specific ways as well. We were loud when we needed to be, we were quiet when we needed to be, we smiled when we needed to, and then we called them out on their bullshit when we needed to as well. And so it was learning the spaces and learning how to show up in those spaces that I think helped us. And not only that too, I think there's this thing that people expected from us as well, because we're so young, is that we would just come up and do the bare minimum. And that wasn't our thing, because we're like, we want to see change. And therefore, if we want to see change, we have to put in the work. And so we decided to put in the work. And so even with the health strategy, we were like, we need it. We're going to get it done. We got it done. And we did like a number of things on our own. We did our own, the first like research around homelessness on our own, because we're always going to them and telling them that the community is homeless and the community is poor, but we never had any data. And so we were like, okay, we're tired of that. And so seeing that y'all don't want to give us the money to do it, we're going to do it ourselves and we're going to figure it out. And we figured it out. And we got it done. And so when we step into the room, we had the data to support it. And so they couldn't challenge us because we're community and we found the data ourselves, and it's coming from the community itself. So they couldn't say to us that what you're saying doesn't make any sense or it's not true. And so it's for us, it was also showing up, but how we showed up as well.
Thank you.
All right. So I think some of my comments may touch on some of the questions I already see popping up. But I just wanted to say one of the ways that, and I mentioned this event earlier that took place in December, the director of Courage explained, right, that, you know, of course, we would want more change than there has been, right, but noted that at least over the last, 5 to 10 years, that there had been some differences in terms of even the results from all the work that feminists have been doing, but the LGBT organizations, many of which were founded in 2010 because of the earthquake that presented, right, an opportunity, right, for Haiti to reconstruct, but also an opportunity for the international to come impose its agenda, right? So we saw folks, especially the evangelicals, becoming, right, a powerhouse against LGBT community, against, right, the feminists, right, and against the people, who practice voodoo, right? So that was sort of what really forced the movement, or forced the community to take on, right, this sort of organizational form in order to advocate, right, for their specific needs. Right, so I think that one of the things that these organizations have done, even when they hold, they have deep critiques of the state, right, is that, well, in the meantime, right, until this said revolution happens, right, we need to be able to make this space, right, as livable as possible. So some of the things that folks concentrated on were, sort of police sensitivity trainings, right, ensuring that the police understood certain or were sensitive to certain realities, right? Particularly, right, when people come to report certain crimes against them, right? Because people were reporting beforehand, right? You would come in, and if you were an LGBT person, and you were talking about, right, sexual assault, that they wouldn't even want to hear from you, right? That today, that those kinds of things are a little less permissible, right? That there's an expectation that you're going to receive some kind of service. So that being said, right, there, I guess those would be some of the small wins, if you will, right, within the system that, right, were actually, all the social movements are trying to, if not reform, right, but completely transform. So, social movements in general always have a contentious relationship with the state. And as Renae was saying, right, like when you gotta smile, when you gotta raise hell, and that's a difficult game to play, particularly when all the other institutions in the country, right, or all the other branches of power are not functioning, right? So what happens if your justice system, is essentially whoever can pay can get the better service, right? Or that your parliament is no longer existing. And even that parliament, when it existed in 2016, tried to put forth a sort of like an anti-same-sex marriage bill, right? So even when you did have parliament, they weren't necessarily the folks, right, who were really doing the representing of the people in reality, right, and what they're looking to do. So we've seen, at least for the LGBT organizations, having to partner with, international institutions, many of whom, at least, I think that's a good thing, right, are run by queer Haitian Americans, queer Haitian Canadians, right? So, hopefully that that has given some results. For example, I don't know if folks, how much you pay attention to Haiti, right? But there's like, different housing projects that are specifically designed, right, to house trans women, for example, right? So there have been some small efforts, and I think these efforts have been made by people who live, in the cracks of empire, right? They're living in the global north, or they've come from the global north, right? But they're attempting to use those positions to see about, right, transferring funds, right, to the groups that I think, this is part of the work that they're trying to do, even if, right, they're coming under the cloak of perhaps a US embassy or some international foundation, attempting to do some work from within, right? But this is part of also what makes the tensions between the social movement groups, right? Where is your funding coming from, right? And therefore, is your work really sort of emanating from the people, or coming from, right, above through some, imposition from the outside? So all the groups, the feminists and the LGBT community always have to deal with that comment, right? Like, oh, you guys are just, sort of pawns in somebody else's international game, as if the groups are not making their own decisions, right? And having to negotiate uncomfortably, right, with the imperialists to be able to make moves on, within their own territory. So it's a complicated game to play. But I think that one of the spaces that has been the most, I think, and it's not without its own problems, like liberatory space for women and all across, trans women, cis women, right? The LGBT community at large, right? And other, all the other non-normative forms of being, has been the, Vodou community. And you can see, and, the reports, and it doesn't mean every single Vodou community, right? That, people carry their own prejudices in these spaces, right? But Vodou in general is a kind of space that is open to, that is not bound by binaries, right? Of race, of gender, and sexuality. And so LGBT folks have found great openings, right, in the Vodou communities, and usually are able to use that as a source of power, and, to legitimize also their presence and their work in the space. So the institutions are not maybe the traditional ones of the state that we can think of, that are allies and that are supporters, right? But it has been other groups in society, even if it's not the ones who are officially part of civil society or who have NGO status, right? But these, these Afro-traditional religious communities have actually been the biggest allies of specifically the LGBT community, but also, allows for a kind of power to come from women that is not challenging, right? That's welcomed. And I think that those would be the institutions that I would point to who've been, instrumental in this space, more than the state, for sure, more than the US Embassy, right? And all those other folks who want to, like, come and tell us what to do.
I think I'm going to continue on that thread of, in terms of the Dominican Republic, there's a new government in place since August 2020, which a new political party after decades of a former political party. So the new political party is the PRM. And the president is Abinader, and I think people were somewhat hopeful that this change would mark a difference, especially for civil society organizations, activists, and particularly Dominicans of Haitian descent that have been really pushing for recognition of their nationality. And yet there hasn't really been much to point to sustained change from this new government. They seem to still be toting the same xenophobic, anti-Haitian, anti-Black lines and rhetoric, going as far as even saying that once the COVID-19 vaccine became available, it would not be given to Haitian migrants, right? So making such public declarations, to me, points to much of the same that we've seen over the years. And to add to that, there's also been a lot of efforts over the years, not just recently, to recognize and grant retired sugarcane workers pension funds. And there was like this entire a whole video montage that was made by the presidency earlier when he first began his term, where he's saying he's giving, I can't remember what number of sugarcane workers their pensions, right? And there was like this big commotion, and it was all very touching, and yet again what we saw was that there wasn't really any continued process for expanding the number. And I think there were actually some doubts as to whether folks were actually getting their pension funds. So in terms of just the sort of capitalist exploitation that becomes very much part of the same conversation that Dominicans of Haitian descent are having, we see that there is a lot of a continuation of the same policies, and also a continued silencing of Black women, even within those spaces, because who's going to get the pension funds also, right? There's not a recognition that oftentimes with sugarcane workers, there were also women who came along who were also providing labor, right? And so just in thinking about what the government has sort of said they were going to do versus what's happening, we don't see that people are very hopeful in terms of seeing change. But where I do think I'm hopeful is very much, again, in sort of how I see other organizers, particularly Afro-Dominican organizers, coming together to denounce the racist history of the Dominican state, right? Creating spaces to recognize the Blackness in the Dominican Republic, recognizing its history, and creating opportunities for folks to connect to the longer, to their Black history, right? So, for example, groups like Acción Afro-Dominicana are working closely with Reconocido, Muñecas Negras, Junta de Prietas. These are all spaces that are anti-racist, but also Black feminist spaces that are coming together to really address the challenges of the Dominican state, right? And challenges is kind of not even close to the word I should be using, but just thinking about what that represents, though, right? In terms of how there has been a lot of international support. There have been institutions that have been there supporting a lot of the issues of denationalization. But what we're seeing more of, or what I'm seeing more of, is local support as well. And that there is a real effort to include the issues, specific issues of Haitian migrants, of their children in the kind of activism that's being carried out. So for me, that makes me hopeful. And that's where I would say I see a lot of collaboration emerging.
So we're getting to time where we want to open it up to the audience for questions. before we do that though, I just wanted to ask, the last thing I wanted to ask was, so where do we go from here? Right? Where do we go from here? And the legacy, this was the legacy of activism, as we're saying, in honor of Andaiye, has been passed on to us. So what do we do next? Where do we go from here? How do folks in the audience get involved, learn about campaigns or projects, or just ways in which they also can be a part of these movements? Yeah, so what next?
Renae.
Well, I should have just started. So what next? That's the question. What's next is, I don't know. I think I'm tired of being quiet, and I'm hoping I'm making sense. I think in terms of when we talk about activism and we talk about, the issues that are affecting, women in general across the board, I think we've taken like a more silent approach, at least especially in Jamaica. Like, I think it was just the other day I was having a conversation with, a group of people, and they were saying they remember days when certain issues were coming around, we would take to the streets and we would, march and we'd do things. But for some reason, we've gotten to a place where we're now far more quiet than we used to be. And of course, there's a place for it. There are different forms of advocacy and there are different forms of, being of activism. But these different forms work. But I also think we need to also start making some more noise, as well as being in the quiet spaces as well. But we do, that's where I think, for me, that's the next step, to start making some more noise, and not just making more noise about issues that affect me, but issues that affect, my sisters, my queer and Black, my queer and Black women, championing those other issues that might not necessarily affect me, or the group that I serve, because that's also important. And I can't say I want people to support my movement and the things that I'm a part of, and I'm also not willing to support the other movements and the other issues that affect, the people who are living in the same space as I am. We all share this earth. And so, and if something affects my sister, it affects me too. And it doesn't matter if I'm living in Jamaica and she's living in South Africa or in Ghana. It affects me as well. And so I have a responsibility to speak on that. I have a responsibility to show up where and when she needs me to. And I also, have a responsibility to give her space to make some noise and to, pardon my language, or the lack of finding a better word, to fuck shit up. and so that's where I am. I think it's time that we start to do that, and we start to give space for people to do that, and to also be the best friend at the back that says, yes, sister, I have your back. Whatever you need, I'm here for it. And that's my commitment here too, as well. For those persons who organize within the region and in other global spaces, and to the members of the panel who are here, and then especially to, this platform. And I was hoping to have a conversation with both Nana and Jamie and Andrea after, but I'm here as well. Wherever you need me, whenever you need me, I'm here, and I will help you fuck shit up. And that's all I'm saying.
Well, one of the things that I've tried to start doing, while the call gets formulated more clearly, and I guess security is figured out, but some of the things that some of the feminists on the ground are thinking about, right? Sort of thinking about this when the US occupied many parts of the Caribbean and Central America, right? Well, in 1915 to 1934, specifically in Haiti, during which, right, specifically Black Americans had come in, right, with the Haitians to do, some sort of non-state based, right, independent investigation of what's going on, in order to amplify, right? That I think the folks in Haiti have tried to push out the news, amplify it, get things translated, right, to inform folks, but are starting to think about, right, that it would be extremely powerful to have, right, non-imperialist, feminist folks who can come on the ground and do some sort of observations, right, and potentially put out, right, a kind of report analysis of what's happening on the ground, right? Because I think a lot of the stuff coming out of Haiti, people are like, oh, these folks are like political, right? And like, I don't want to do politics, right? What would it mean to have, right, sort of a quote unquote apolitical international observers who are on the same page, right, as these organizations responding to their call, right? The call is not being formally made, it's being formulated because there's a security issue. How do you provide security to folks when you yourself are a militant and you can't quite provide your own security, and you don't want to necessarily say, hey, US Embassy, we're here, can you protect us, right? So it's figuring out those details, but I think that that's one of the things that could be, I know that there's a COVID, I know that it costs money, right? And those are the details, right? But I think that that'll be something that I think will come up that I'll definitely share when it's a much more clearly, thought out. The security thing is what I think is stopping folks from making the call, right? But that there is the interest in inviting people in to help amplify more than just put out a statement or sign a petition, right? That there could be even greater international attention brought. And maybe that's even the kind of material that can be used to bring to an international criminal court level, right? So I'm just putting it out there for now. And I think that would be a next step that I would share here.
So I forgot to mention that there has been a proposal for an anti-discrimination law in the Dominican Republic for quite some time. It specifically looks at LGBTQ rights, but there hasn't really been much move on it. But it's been on the table for many years, I should say. And the feminist spaces have also been pushing for this decriminalization of abortion again more recently. There's been a new wave again of trying to push on these issues. So I'm hopeful that there might be some movement in terms of these issues. I guess in terms of where I would direct your attention to, I think for us as a collective, it's been and continues to be to amplify the work of Reconocido, to amplify the work of other folks on the ground like MUDA, the Dominican Haitian Women's Movement, Fundación Código Humano, who's led by Altagracia John Joseph, and then Muñecas Negras, of course. And there's a fundraiser that you can find online specifically around Muñecas Negras. If you go online, you can find it under GoFundMe and their name. So a lot of our efforts and support continued in that direction. And there's one of the things that makes me very hopeful and excited is that within spaces like Muñecas Negras, that there's really been the opportunity for them to create a space for themselves, but also to theorize, which is what they say they're doing also. And they've been theorizing about what it means to be a Black woman from the Batey specifically, and what kind of critical thought can they also develop and engage in. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of critical thought from the Batey emerges from that space as well for us to work with and theorize. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you all so much. This conversation has been great. We wanted to wrap up with one last question from the audience. And it's, who else or what other examples do you all look to as blueprints for action? From whom, what do you draw inspiration for radical change?
Renae.
So you people will continue this.
Oh Lord. I don't know. There's so many people that I draw inspiration from. Well, for one, the people that I work with, like we're an entire family. We're a family. I literally call them my sisters and my brothers. And of course, there are a few like international people, including yourself, Nana. Because this is not the first time I've seen you. Actually, I've watched a few of your videos even on YouTube, and stuff. And so it just amazes me when I see women, strive and do excellent things, if you know what I mean. And especially when I see people of trans experience as well doing amazing things. And that makes me so hopeful, and it makes me realize that I can do it. Because and I'll share a personal experience. I mean, growing up in Jamaica, I've been through a lot. I was homeless for a little bit. And I was extremely sick for a while as well. And especially when I lost my mother, she was my major supporter. And all of that happened within the space of just a few years. And so there were a lot of things that I thought would have never been a reality. I never thought that I would be leading an organization. I never thought that I would be finishing school. I always thought that those things were, like a dead end. And I always thought, being who I was, or who I am rather, there was something wrong with that. And wanting to express who I truly was and to accept who I was, there was something wrong with that. And it's after I saw amazing people like you who are on the panel and people who are around me now and understanding that who I am is not wrong. And, people that I'm not the only person who's going through it, and I'm not the only person that exists with these challenges as well. And that these challenges don't define me. And, being a member of the trans community isn't the only thing about me. I finally started to understand that, I am amazing, and that I am loved, and that I am deserving, and that I am worth all the good things that everybody else deserves. And, it's after seeing that and seeing people like you and like others and others like you who stand up so boldly to say that, we're here, we exist, and we deserve this right. And everybody else who is like us deserves this right as well. Whether they're woman, they're Black, or they're trans, they deserve to exist. And that is my inspiration. And that helps me to continue to do the work that I'm doing. And I'm hoping that I can be an inspiration to someone else. I kid around and I say that I'm not an academic, even though, I love the spaces, and I do from time to time contribute to a few things. But, I'm so amazed by, especially the women on the panel now. Like, Nana, you amaze me, right? And Mamyrah, I'm sorry if I'm messing up your name. You are so brilliant. And like Amarilys and you're all so amazing. And just thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here and to be amongst you, because honestly, I do feel as if, it is worth it. And I do feel as if I'm somebody that is worthy of being in the space and of being who I am and affirming that. So thank you so much. And that is where I get my inspiration from. And thank you.
I'm gonna have to echo Renae, that the people who inspire me or keep me on my toes or keep me clear, right, are other Black women, including the ones who will like call you out, right, when you make a mistake, which is useful because I think we don't have enough spaces where we can actually constructively critique one another towards making better decisions, right? So, and even if we don't have them, I still, and I still appreciate, whether it's the constructive, more to what Renae is saying, right, the love, but also the folks who will say, hey, you got to work on this, you got to get this, better, and then you got to think more critically about these pieces, whether it's in the written work or doing the solidarity work. I think that has been the most useful, right, to stay engaged. is in those kind of honest exchanges, you know, both the ones that uplift you and then the ones that, you know, tell you do better next time, right? So I've, you know, I would say that it's a community of like, you know, some elders, but definitely peers, you know, that continues to inspire me and throw me into these discussions in groups, right? Because we can't do the work on our own, right? Like if you think you're gonna sit here and you're just gonna interact with yourself and you're gonna get it straight, but just like you know, being more courageous to be in these kinds of spaces to speak through, you know, the difficult things with folks and sharpen analysis, right? And get deeper into, you know, the intersectional that we talk about theoretically, but like how do we really do that? And how does it give us, right, concrete actions where we can move together? I would say those have been, you know, my continued sources of inspiration, the accent coming out. It's late.
I love it. It's really hard to follow Renae and Mamyrah because I think there's so much that has already been said and it's all so beautiful. And for me, I was really excited to be on this panel because I knew I would be on a panel with all of you. So I think that in itself has been inspiration, and Black Women Radicals is definitely an inspiration for so many. And so I'm very appreciative of this space, and I remember thinking if there's a space, a panel that I want to be on, it's this one. And so I just want to just kind of give another shout out because it's really, you're doing amazing, beautiful work, and you're bringing us together into this space, which I think so many of us are feeling the need for, and just feeling uplifted by this, right? Despite all the difficulties of these conversations, how troubling they are, and how much more is left to do. So I don't take that task lightly, but I do want to just express my appreciation for having this space for this conversation. And I'm truly inspired by so many women, so many that I can't even start naming them all. But I'll just say that today I taught Beatriz Nascimento's work in class, who is a Black Brazilian scholar, also historian, and does all this amazing work on quilombos and fugitivity, right? And so just kind of thinking about how much more we still have to learn, so how much more we can learn from each other, and the beauty of having spaces like this to do that learning. So just thank you.
Before we go, I just wanted to make a plug. I know I've been mentioning this book the whole time, but the book is called The Point is to Change the World. It's selected writings from Andaiye. It is edited by the amazing Dr. Alyssa Trotz. And if you buy this book, the proceeds go to organizing, which is the point. And so it goes to, the proceeds from the sale of this book goes to Red Thread in Guyana. So there was a note. Oh shoot, crap. Give me 1 second.
That's for Andrea. Do you have it, or does Jamie have the note? And Jamie should come out.
Yes, we have a note from Dr. Trotz. Jamie, you can come out.
Thank you. Usually I like to be behind the scenes, but I'm back now. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for, first of all, our amazing panelists. You should, you can rewatch it, but I just am always encouraged by the comments that people have. And throughout the Caribbean Feminism Series, people have shared, well, this series reinvigorated my research interests that I had given up on. Or someone said, and forgive me for forgetting your name, but they said, this panel feels like home. There's no other way I can describe it except feeling like home. And this is a testament to the power that you all have, the testament of just a radical, badass Black feminist doing the work, right? And I'm just really appreciative to always be in your presence. I learned so much from each and every one of you, every panel, every event. And honestly, I'm thankful that you believe in Black men radicals and the mission, vision, and values. And I just appreciate you all so much because all of you are truly Black men radicals through and through. So I always say, I'm always going to cry, but this is like really powerful. And this has encouraged me through just honestly the depression of the pandemic, being able to come together and feel energized. Like I feel like I can run a mile, but probably not. But but I feel energized. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
So which of you gonna read the note?
I don't have the note, unfortunately.
Uh-oh. Well, it's okay.
Yeah, I think Dr. Trout said she sent it to Andrea, but if we can't, oh, you're on mute, Andrea. I'm so sorry.
She sent it to Black Women Radical.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Yes, we just wanted to give some space. Dr. Alyssa Trotz, who is the editor of the book and has just done so much work, really just keeping Andaiye's legacy alive, sent a note for us to read, to send us off, which thank you all so much for just being here. I'm really grateful. If I'm really honest with you, this has been one of the hardest weeks I've had academically, so just thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nana. Thank you. We appreciate you so much. You have no idea. And just send our love to Nana. She's really
Nana.
We appreciate you so much. I want to read this from Dr. Trotz about Andaiye's legacy. So Dr. Trotz says, from my heart, from all Guyanese and all else who love her, thank you so much for this grace and for honoring Andaiye, my other mother, today. Drawing explicit inspiration from Selma James' anthology, Sex, Race, and Class, Selma has a new anthology that should be out later this summer. Andaiye saw her own essays as also primarily organizing tools that should be put to use, especially by younger generations of feminists in the region and beyond. Extended and transformed in the context of movements for change, organizing tools, making use of her words, her ideas, her experiences, language in this text. This gathering is exactly in this spirit. And crucial too, the intentional work to open space for the discussions across the English, Spanish, French, Jamaican, Creole speaking region. Give thanks. Haiti was hugely close to Andaiye's heart. She used to always say, we owe Haiti. And I believe she speaks to this in the penultimate essay in her book, and the placement in the text is not accidental. And she was involved in the region's denouncement of the racist Dominican Republic Supreme Court ruling of 2013, along with the late Jamaican economist Norman Gervon, and the activism across several countries that led to CARICOM's eventual denunciation of the decision. The grassroots women organization Andaiye co-founded Red Thread is still going strong 35 years later. So thank you so much, Dr. Trotz, and thank you to everybody for coming together and honoring Andaiye's legacy. I'm filled with so much emotion, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good one, everyone. Thank you again for everything.
Thank you, Amarilys, Mamyrah, and Renae. Y'all have just blessed me today.
Thank you for having me. And Nana, I'm really hoping we get to connect even further. Like I said, I've been following you. I've always wanted to meet you, but I didn't want to be a stalker. but I'm hoping we can talk. And Jamie, you as well. I would love for us to talk somewhere. I would love to be more a part of this. And Black women radicals, Black feminist radicals, I would love to be a part of it even more. So thank you. And of course, I would love to, catch up some way with Mamyrah. Could you pronounce the name again? Mamyrah. Thank you. And Amarilys.
Yeah.
Great. I would love for us to talk as well. You guys are so brilliant. So amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. And whenever COVID ends, you need to come to Jamaica so I can treat you.
Yes. Thank you again, and have a great night, everyone. We will be connected and hopefully soon. And so thank you once again for honoring Andaiye's spirit. I feel like she's with us, always with us. So thank you again. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.